On the international stage, Sweden has a very specific reputation. A country that stayed neutral through both world wars, the country that gives out Nobel Prizes, and something of a moral conscience during the Cold War, lecturing both sides about the evils of the atom bomb. But for about 25 years, while it was building exactly that reputation, Sweden was also secretly building a nuclear weapon of its own. We're not talking about some rough draft of a plan. It was a real program with real hardware and funding being dedicated to it. By the mid-1960s, the hard engineering was essentially finished. What stood between Sweden and the bomb was a few more kilograms of plutonium and a single political yes. The question usually asked is why countries build the bomb. In this case, the far more interesting question is why not? A country with the engineers, the uranium, and the strategic rationale chose to walk away from it. In 1945, Sweden found itself in a strange position. One of the few countries in Europe mostly unaffected by World War II, the country was now awkwardly caught between two of the largest militaries on Earth. Sweden sat in the gap. The gap, in practice, was a few hundred kilometers of Baltic waters between them and the Soviet Union. Neutrality was the national policy, but a very specific kind of neutrality, focused on building a huge domestic defense industry. The idea was to simply make an invasion too costly and risky to ever attempt in the first place. But there's a practical problem with this thinking. A country of 7 million people is plainly not going to be able to field enough men, guns, and tanks to match the Soviet Union. Swedish planners began thinking the way a good number of smaller countries did in that era. Maybe you didn't need to match them directly, just have a weapon so powerful that invading your country at all is a suicidal move. The thinking started almost immediately. Days after the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the commander of the Swedish military asked the National Defense Research Institute a question. Basically, hey, what the hell are these things, and can we get one? The world barely knew a nuclear weapon was even possible, and Sweden was immediately studying them. By the start of the 1950s, these early notes and research efforts had turned into an actual program. It had strong supporters in the government too, including the new commander of the Swedish military, Nils Swedlund. He made the case that getting a bomb was the only way a country of Sweden's size and strategic position could maintain sovereignty and neutrality. It also helped that Sweden was very well suited to build one. Start with the raw material. Most countries that want a bomb have to go hunting for the stuff a bomb is actually made of, weapons-grade uranium or plutonium. It doesn't occur in nature, you have to manufacture it, with enormous, expensive, hard-to-hide facilities. The raw ore is one thing, but turning it into bomb-grade material is a project a country can't easily run quietly. Sweden's advantage was that it owned the first step outright. Buried in the bedrock under places like Narka and the Billingen Plateau are some of the largest uranium deposits in Europe. Now, it was very low grade, locked up in black shale, and quite difficult to extract, but it was theirs, and they could get as much as they wanted without having to ask anyone. On top of that, Sweden had something most of Europe didn't in 1945, an industrial base. No bombed-out factories or cities full of bullet holes. Instead, Sweden had some of the world's best universities and infrastructure, combined with plenty of engineers and chemists. If you were a country pursuing nuclear weapons, this was pretty much the ideal starter pack. Two organizations worked together in secret to begin work on a bomb. The first was the National Defense Research Institute, or FOA in its Swedish initials. The other was a state-owned civilian company, AB Atomenergi, set up in 1947 to research nuclear energy. Officially, these were two separate entities. One did weapons research, one did peaceful research. It was a pretty seamless idea in total. Sweden would build reactors around its own natural uranium and heavy water. No enriched fuel, which meant no dependence on the handful of countries that could enrich it. These reactors would do two jobs at once. They'd generate electricity the way any power plant does, but the spent fuel they left behind would contain plutonium, and plutonium is bomb material. One set of reactors for two products. It was deniable, too. Every piece of it could be presented to the public and to the world as a peaceful energy program. It was economical. The taxpayer was paying for power plants anyway, so the military capability came bundled in at a discount, and it kept the whole chain inside Sweden's borders, start to finish. Doing it all yourself, however, is slow. Mining your own ore, making your own heavy water, building your own reactors, breeding plutonium a gram at a time, then learning the chemistry to pull it back out takes a long time to do. This wasn't something they could just sprint towards. It would take a couple decades, at least. A project that takes decades is also a project that needs to survive everything thrown at it in that time. Sweden completed its first reactor in 1954, buried 30 meters under the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. This first reactor actually used imported uranium and relied on heavy water brought in from Norway, and was pushed to produce as much plutonium as it could. That amount turned out to be about half a gram per day, which is pretty much nothing. Most people working on the reactor would be dead by the time it yielded enough for a bomb. The real point was to learn, and learn they did. The real plutonium was to come from subsequent reactors. There was Augusta, just south of Stockholm. Officially a civilian plant, supplying heat to the suburb of Farsta, but tuned secretly for plutonium, with fuel cycled in and out more often than a normal power station ever would. There was also Marviken, the big one, designed from the start with the bomb makers in charge, designed to churn out around 80 kilograms of weapons-grade plutonium a year, enough for roughly 10 warheads annually. The timeline the program was on was quite aggressive. They planned to have 10 kilograms of weapons-grade plutonium by 1963, enough for a warhead. A design for a bomb was completed by 1965 with prototype components. The physicists also figured out they'd only need 6 kilograms of plutonium per bomb, rather than the 50 they had first estimated. They had one of Europe's most powerful computers running implosion simulations, and a test range where they were detonating conventional charges to perfect the explosives. Out in the tundra near Jokkmokk, above the Arctic Circle, the military ran a pair of enormous open-air experiments in 1956 and 57, codenamed Sirius and Vega. These were huge stacks of conventional explosives, around 60 tons worth, set off to study how a nuclear blast would actually behave, the shock waves, the pressures, what it would do to vehicles and fortifications. The largest threw a mushroom cloud approximately a kilometer into the sky. By the mid-1960s, the engineering work for a Swedish bomb was pretty much a solved issue. It is often claimed, as Wikipedia does, that at this point Sweden was just 6 months away from getting a nuclear weapon. That statement has quite a few qualifiers, though. 6 months only makes sense if you ignore the hardest part of the process, actually producing the plutonium. The reactor at the Royal Institute of Technology never did get past its half a gram a day production levels. Augusta delivered, but nowhere near the planned amounts, enough for maybe a couple of devices, not the approximately 100 that the military wanted. Marviken, the reactor the whole plan leaned on, became a technical and financial disaster, so overcomplicated by the demand for plutonium that it never produced a single watt for the grid and was eventually abandoned. By the end of the 1950s, after more than a decade of work, Sweden had something like 5 kilograms of plutonium, not even enough for one bomb at the estimates of the time. Sweden, in theory, could have just forced their way through the issue, build more reactors, spend more money, and wait out the delays until they had enough plutonium. But that meant committing even harder to the most expensive and difficult version of this plan, right as an easy off-ramp was appearing. The problem was this off-ramp led away from building a bomb. The weapons program wasn't one thing off to the side, it was conjoined with the civilian nuclear power program. The same reactors, the same fuel, the same budget for two purposes. This was supposed to be a clever strategy, but it undermined the entire program. The civilian half of the program had its own priorities, and they weren't military ones. If you wanted to make electricity, and make it cheaply, the Swedish do-it-yourself approach really made no sense. They had to figure out every part themselves, and build it all themselves, when other countries could help them and for cheaper. The US had a very good offer on the table, through the Atoms for Peace program. Sweden could buy enriched American fuel and reactor technology, which would make Swedish nuclear power far cheaper and simpler. It did, however, come with the condition that Sweden had to pledge to only use the technology for peaceful purposes, with American inspectors doing random checks to ensure this remained the case. Because the bomb was welded to the civilian program, it had to deal with whatever the civilian program decided. Every time the energy side reached for the cheaper American option, and economically, why wouldn't it, it wrapped a whole nother layer of difficulty around the whole enterprise. A reactor running on safeguarded American fuel can't secretly make weapons plutonium on the side. The inspections that came bundled with cheap power were, in effect, inspections on the bomb. The two things had been fused together precisely so nobody could tell them apart, and that meant you couldn't feed one without starving the other. For most of the program's life, its greatest protection was that almost nobody knew it existed. A weapon built inside a civilian power project doesn't attract protesters because there's nothing to protest. But security through obscurity only lasts for so long, and the domestic route was slow. This was a 2-decade project after all. When rumors of a nuclear weapons project eventually trickled out over the years, Sweden had to contend with its own political system and a vocal public that could vote. The first crack actually came from the ruling party in 1956. The Social Democratic Women's Federation publicly came out against Swedish nuclear weapons, even as their own party was working on them. A great deal of public debate soon followed. Peace organizations, church groups, newspapers, academics, the political opposition, pretty much everyone in society started loudly debating whether Sweden should have the bomb at all. A dedicated campaign group formed, the Action Group Against Swedish Atomic Weapons, pulling together people whose only shared conviction was that this was a line the country should not cross. It was a large and increasing share of the country opposing their country getting the bomb. To see how strange this was getting, look at a single year. In 1957, 3 things happened more or less at once. The Supreme Commander formally asked to begin building atomic bombs. The government gave the FOA permission to buy weapons-grade plutonium from Britain to get things moving faster. And the Swedish parliament voted to ban nuclear weapons research outright. In the space of 12 months, the military asked to start production, the state went out to buy bomb material, and the legislature outlawed the whole thing entirely. Parliament did leave a loophole, however, permitting so-called protective research, the study of nuclear weapons in order to defend against them. It was a very flimsy excuse, and everyone knew it, but it let the design work simply continue under a new label. Sweden couldn't pursue nuclear weapons openly, only in the legislative gaps left behind. This put the Prime Minister in an almost impossible spot. Tage Erlander had been in favor of the bomb, but he was a social democrat leading a social democratic government, and the opposition to the bomb was coming from inside his own coalition. He couldn't just force this policy through. The concern had to be addressed somehow, so he did the thing politicians do when a problem won't go away. He tried to park it. The decision was postponed, studied, deferred, handed to committees, pushed down the road, again and again through the late 50s, and allowed the program to limp into the 60s. Every year the engineers spent grinding away on the plutonium problem was another year the politicians spent not committing, and another year for the opposition to grow. Time was supposed to be on the program's side, but turned out to be its enemy. The longer the bomb took to build, the more certain it became that Sweden would never agree to build it. By the early 1960s, the political window had simply moved. The bomb went from an assumed eventual yes to an open question to a firm no. Not because of any single dramatic event, but because a democracy had been given years to think about it and slowly decided it didn't want the thing. While this debate was happening inside the country, the global environment around nuclear weapons shifted too. The early Cold War assumption that a serious country would want its own bomb, that this was just what any state with the capability would eventually do, began to change due to greater public awareness and alarm. Fallout from atmospheric testing was turning up in people's food and children's teeth. The superpowers, having stared into the abyss a few times, started, very hesitantly and cautiously, to talk about limits. The International Atomic Energy Agency was set up in 1957 to regulate the line between peaceful and military nuclear technology. In 1963, a treaty was signed banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere. Building through the decade was the effort that would become the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, a global agreement designed to stop exactly the kind of thing Sweden was doing. For a country already having second thoughts, this changed the entire cost-benefit calculation. A Swedish bomb wasn't just expensive and politically toxic at home anymore. It was starting to look like something with global ramifications. It was the kind of thing responsible countries were now organizing specifically to prevent. The reputational price of building a bomb went up every year, while the strategic payoff kept looking more and more uncertain. The military itself also eventually shifted its position. Sweden's defense thinking was evolving, and the more carefully they looked, the less sense the weapon made purely on military terms. A small nuclear arsenal wouldn't deter the Soviet Union as much as make Sweden the target, inviting the preemptive strike they were trying to avoid. The cost was only increasing, and that was money not being spent on the tried and tested conventional weapons Sweden had a much greater chance of getting real use out of. Four pressures were convening all at once. American influence had made the weapons path slow and highly regulated. The public had made it politically impossible. The world had made it reputationally costly. By the end, even the military had stopped believing in it. Every reason to build a nuclear weapon had slowly been eroded from different directions at roughly the same time. There wasn't much of an argument to keep going forward with the program. Sweden being Sweden, they decided to put their own spin on it. If they couldn't have the bomb, they were going to be the absolute loudest voice against nuclear weapons anywhere. The person who came to embody this was Alva Myrdal, a Swedish diplomat who spent years at the international disarmament talks and turned the cause of nuclear abolition into something of a national pastime. In 1982, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. Sweden's reputation for being the premier anti-nuclear state was ironically grown out of their own ambitions. Sweden's nuclear efforts ended fairly anticlimactically. In 1968, the Non-Proliferation Treaty opened for signature, and Sweden signed, publicly committing to never build a nuclear weapon. The weapons research wound down over the next few years, defunded and deprioritized rather than abruptly shut off. In 1972, in a set of final experiments, the FOA detonated a handful of scale model charges to study one last time how a plutonium core implodes. Shortly after, most of Sweden's plutonium was shipped off to Britain. It's tempting to present this whole story in a sympathetic way, that Sweden had a change of heart and voluntarily walked away from building a bomb, but that isn't the case. It refrained because building a bomb turned out to be slow, and slowness let everything else catch up. It gave time for the Americans to make the peaceful path cheaper, for the public to organize, for the world to write treaties against exactly this, and for the military's own logic to turn against it. A country really did get to the edge of the bomb and chose not to step over, and that choice held for good. We tend to think countries get talked out of the bomb by force, sanctions, threats, and airstrikes. Sweden suggests something else usually does the real work. Make the peaceful path the easy one, integrate a country into the wider world, and give it a reason not to. Nuclear weapons don't get stopped in a single dramatic moment. They get stopped slowly, by 100 smaller decisions.
Just nu kan du inte nå det önskade numret. Var vänlig försök igen om en liten stund.